They stood on the wooden platform like little statues, their small hands clutched together, eyes wide with fear. 3 sisters, no taller than a fence post, were being auctioned off like livestock in the dusty town square of Dust Devil Creek. The oldest, Lily, barely 10, had her arms wrapped around her younger sisters, Daisy, who clutched a worn rag doll, and Rose, the tiniest of them all, her face streaked with dirt and dried tears. No one moved. No one spoke. Just the heavy sound of summer heat buzzing through the air and the cold stare of Judge Thorne, standing tall and proud beside the auctioneer. "These children need a home," the judge said, his voice loud and commanding. "A place to earn their keep." But the crowd stayed still. It wasn't that the people didn't see the girls, it's that they chose not to. No one wanted to be the one who took in 3 mouths to feed, especially not 3 girls with no land, no family, and no future. They were orphans now, after a fire took their parents and the only home they'd ever known, and as far as Dust Devil Creek was concerned, they were someone else's problem. That morning had started like any other. The dust clung to everything, and the town buzzed with quiet unease. But for one woman, it wasn't just another day. Her name was Era. She'd come to Dust Devil Creek on a mail-order bride contract, not for love, not even for hope, just for peace, just to disappear. Her own life had unraveled after she buried her only child, and something inside her had broken in a way that couldn't be mended. When her intended husband, a quiet farmer named Jedediah, died of fever a week before she arrived, she wasn't surprised, disappointed, maybe, but not surprised. Life had stopped offering her good things long ago. Now, she was a stranger in a town that didn't want her. The town council had already made their decision. She was to be put back on the next stagecoach eastward. No husband, no home, no use. Era was standing at the back of the crowd, half shadowed by the wooden overhang of the saloon, when the auction started. At first, she didn't understand what was happening, and then she did. And something deep inside her, something she thought had long since turned to ash, began to burn. She hadn't come here to save anyone, but when she looked at those girls, when she saw the way Lily stood tall, shielding her sisters, trying to be brave, when she was barely more than a child herself, she couldn't stay silent. $1. Era's voice rang out, thin but steady. The crowd turned as one, their eyes narrowing, searching. A whisper rippled through them. The mail-order bride. The widow without a husband. What was she thinking? Judge Thorne's mouth curled into something that might have once been a smile, but now looked more like a sneer. "And what will you feed them with, miss?" he asked, loud enough for all to hear. "Grief." Era stepped forward. She felt her knees shake but kept walking until she stood just a few steps from the platform. "The contract said I'm owed room and board for 1 year. Even if the groom dies," she said, "I'll use it to care for them." Whether the law backed her or not, she didn't know. But in that moment, it didn't matter. Her words were enough to make Judge Thorne pause. Enough to make the auctioneer look uncertain. Enough to change everything. "Fine," Thorne hissed. "Take them. Let's see how long you last." It wasn't a victory. It was a dare. The girls didn't move at first. It was Lily who took the first shaky step, her sisters still clinging to her sides. Ara held out her hand, not like someone reaching for a servant, but like someone reaching for a friend. The girl took it, then Daisy, then Rose, and the 4 of them walked away from that platform together, leaving behind the silence of a town that had already counted them out. They didn't go to a warm house or a cozy cabin. The Miller farm was nothing but scorched earth and a half-standing barn that reeked of ash and mildew, but it was theirs, at least for now. The judge had made it clear taxes were due, and they had 90 days before the land would be seized. That night, the girls huddled together on a pile of old hay, wrapped in one thin blanket, while Era sat awake against the barn wall, listening to the wind whistle through the holes in the roof. The weight of what she'd done settled on her shoulders like lead. She had no money, no food, no plan. Just 3 frightened children, who looked at her like she was their last hope. She didn't feel brave. She felt terrified. The next morning, the judge sent a message through his foreman. The taxes had to be paid, or the land would be reclaimed. It wasn't just a warning. It was a message. You're not welcome here. But even in the face of that, Era refused to back down. Each day, she and the girls worked to patch up the barn, to forage for food, to make something out of nothing. They were clinging to each other, the way only people with no one else can. Slowly, trust began to grow. Lily became her helper. Daisy found edible plants and roots. Rose started to smile again. One evening, As the sun dipped low and the prairie turned gold, Lily spoke quietly. Papa said he was digging a new well. Said he found something. Said it would change everything. Ara looked at the half-dug spot behind the ruins of the house. Hope was a dangerous thing, but it was all they had left. That night, when the girls were asleep, she picked up a rusted shovel and started to dig. The earth was hard, stubborn, like the town itself. But she kept going. Her hands bled. Her arms ached. Still, she dug. And just as the first light of morning touched the sky, her shovel hit something solid, would dart something buried. And whatever it was, might just change everything. Era knelt in the dirt, brushing her trembling fingers over the edge of the wooden box. The shovel clattered beside her, forgotten. The air was still, almost holding its breath with her, as she worked the soil away until the lid was exposed. It wasn't big, maybe the size of a small crate, but it felt heavy in her hands as she lifted it from the earth and carried it into the barn. The girls stirred in their sleep, but she didn't wake them. Whatever this was, she needed to see it alone first. Inside the box was a sealed envelope, worn and yellow with time, and beneath it, a folded paper wrapped in oilcloth. The handwriting on the envelope was strong and steady. To whoever finds this, it read. Era opened it slowly. The letter was from Thomas Miller, the girl's father. As she read his words, her heart began to race. He wrote about something hidden under the farm, something powerful. A spring, not just water, but a deep underground source that never ran dry. The only one in the valley. He and Judge Thorne had once been partners, but Thorne had betrayed him, falsifying documents, spreading lies, and trying for years to take the land. Thomas had known it was only a matter of time. He had written this letter in fear that something might happen to him, and his daughters would be left alone. And something had happened. The fire. Era looked over at the girls, sleeping huddled. Together her stomach turned. This wasn't just an accident. Their parents had been taken from them. The land wasn't worthless like Thorne claimed. It was the most valuable piece of soil in the valley. And now she understood why he wanted it so badly. Water meant power, control, survival, and Era. Era had just stepped into the middle of something much bigger than she ever imagined. In the days that followed, she kept the discovery quiet. She hid the letter and the deed beneath the barn's floorboards, wrapping them in a cloth and placing them under a loose plank. She wanted to believe she had time to figure out what to do next, to protect the girls, to maybe get the papers to someone in power. But Dust Devil Creek wasn't the kind of place that gave a woman like her time. Thorne had eyes everywhere, and Ara had a sinking feeling he already suspected something. The pressure around them began to grow. People in town, who once only ignored her, now turned openly hostile. She was refused credit at the store. The blacksmith wouldn't lend her tools. The baker stopped selling her bread. It was a slow, silent war, one that tried to starve her into surrender. Silas, the judge's foreman, came by once again. This time, he didn't bother hiding the threat. 90 days are almost up, he said quietly. Judge says the land goes back to the town if the taxes aren't paid. He's already drawing up the paperwork. Era stood tall, even if her knees felt like giving out. Tell the judge, we're not going anywhere, she said. Silas looked at her for a long moment. You should leave while you still can, he said. But there was something in his eyes, not warning, but worry. Then he turned his horse and rode off, leaving her standing there, with her fists clenched, and her heart thudding. That night, she stayed up long after the girls went to sleep. She held the deed in her lap, her fingers running over the seal. It was real, it had to be, but where could she take it? The local sheriff wouldn't help. He answered to Thorne. The only hope was the territorial marshal's office, 100 miles away, and there was no money, no horse, no one she could trust enough to send. It felt impossible. Then one morning Ara found Rose crying by the door, clutching her rag doll with shaking hands. There was a man, she whispered. He was watching the barn. Ara's blood ran cold. She didn't need to ask who. Thorne was closing in. Things only got worse. One of the chickens they'd caught went missing. The roof patch they'd worked so hard on had been torn open during the night. Someone had come by. Someone wanted to scare them. But Ara wouldn't leave. She couldn't. Not now. Not with the truth in her hands and the girls depending on her. Days turned into weeks, and the tension wrapped tighter around their little home like a noose. Then came the knock. 3 sharp raps at the barn door, just after sunset. Era reached for the shovel she kept by the fire, and opened the door slowly. Judge Thorne stood there, flanked by 2 grim-faced men. He wore a thin smile, but his eyes were like ice. "Good evening, Miss Ara," he said smoothly. "I thought I'd come by with a friendly offer. $500. Enough to get you and the children far away from this dusty town. A fresh start." Ara felt the girls huddle behind her. Lily's hand slid into hers. "You're not interested in helping us," Ara said, her voice low. "You want what's under this land." Thorn's smile twitched. "Now, that's quite an accusation. I only want what's best for everyone. And I'd hate to see you and those girls get hurt." He stepped forward, and Ara didn't back down. "This land isn't for sale," she said. Thorn's smile disappeared. "Then you've made your choice." He turned to leave, but one of his men lingered for a second too long, his eyes scanning the barn like he was already measuring what would soon be his. That night, Ara didn't sleep, neither did Lily. They sat together by the fire, the letter and deed between them, the weight of what they now carried pressing hard on both their hearts. And then, just before dawn, came the sound of horses, more than one, fast closing in. They were out of time. Ara moved fast, her bare feet silent on the barn floor as she reached for the hidden box under the loose plank. The horses were close, now hooves pounding the dry earth like warning drums. Lily was already up, her little face pale but steady as she helped wake the younger girls without panic. Rose clutched her rag doll. Daisy slipped her hand into her ass. None of them cried. They just looked at her, waiting for what to do next. There was no time to run, no place to hide. Ara did the only thing she could. She tucked the deed and Thomas Miller's letter into her coat, pulled the girls close, and stepped out into the dusty morning as the first light touched the valley. Judge Thorne rode in first, dressed in black as if he were coming to a funeral. Behind him were his two men, rifles slung across their shoulders. And just beyond them, to her surprise, was Silas. But he wasn't riding with them. He was off to the side, his expression unreadable, but his rifle wasn't drawn. "Well," Thorne said, as he dismounted, brushing invisible dust from his coat, "seems you've ignored every warning I've given, and I'm tired of being patient." Ara didn't answer. She stepped forward, the girls behind her, her hand pressed over the pocket that held the papers. "You came to take what doesn't belong to you." Thorne laughed, but there was no humor in it. "This land is mine, miss. Always was. The law says so. The sheriff says so. And no one in this town will raise a hand to stop me." But that wasn't true anymore. Behind them, more riders appeared over the ridge. Farmers, old men, young ranch hands. The town doctor, Dr. Adams. A dozen, maybe more. Armed not for a fight, but to stand for something they had been too afraid to defend before. One by one, they lined up behind Ara, their presence silent but loud enough to shake the quiet morning. Thorne turned slowly. "What is this?" he said, his voice starting to crack. Dr. Adams stepped forward, holding up a silver locket. "Thomas Miller gave this to me the day before the fire," he said. "He told me if anything happened, I was to protect his family and his land. We all heard the rumors, but now we have proof." Ara pulled the papers from her coat and held them high. "This is the original deed, signed and sealed. The land and the water beneath it belongs to the Miller family, not to you." The judge's eyes narrowed, and for a heartbeat, it seemed he might still bluff, might still try to claw his way out. But then Silas stepped forward, slowly dismounting, rifle still slung across his chest. "It's over, Judge," he said, his voice calm but firm. "I followed you long enough. Watched you break families and steal futures. Not this time." Thorne's face twisted with rage. In a flash, he pulled a small pistol from his coat, aiming not at Ara, but at the children. A coward's move. A last attempt to control something, anything. But Silas was faster. With one swift motion, he raised his rifle and fired. The shot cracked through the air like thunder. The pistol flew from Thorne's hand, and he stumbled backward, dropping to the dirt with a howl of pain. His men froze. They hadn't signed up for this kind of fight. Slowly, they raised their hands and backed away. The valley held its breath. Dr. Adams moved first, collecting the pistol and motioning for two of the farmers to take the judge into custody. Silas kept his rifle up until they had the judge on a wagon bound for the town jail. Ara's legs nearly gave out as the weight of it all hit her. What could have happened? What didn't? Lily hugged her tight, burying her face into Ara's coat. Rose reached for her hand. Daisy, ever watchful, looked up at her and whispered, "Is it over?" Ara nodded slowly. "Yes, sweetheart, it's over." But in truth, it was just beginning. The documents were delivered to the territorial office. With Dr. Adams and Silas both giving sworn statements, the Miller sisters were confirmed as legal heirs to the land and the water rights it held. With Thorne's grip broken, the people of Dust Devil Creek began to breathe again. The well that Thomas Miller had discovered became a shared resource for the entire valley. Ara made sure of it. She stood in the middle of the town square weeks later and announced that no family would ever be denied water again, not for money, not for fear, not for power. People listened. The old barn was repaired, the burned farmhouse slowly rebuilt. Neighbors who had once turned away now showed up with lumber, bread, and fence posts. The same town that had once shunned Era now stood beside her. And not because they pitied her, but because they respected her. She hadn't come to Dust Devil Creek to be a hero. She hadn't come to be a mother. She had come to disappear. But sometimes, the place you're trying to run from is the one that needs you most. Lily, Daisy, and Rose never let go of her hand again, and Era never let go of them. They became a family, not by blood, but by something stronger: choice, love, and survival. The pain Era carried didn't vanish, but it changed. It became her strength, her reminder, her reason to keep going. In time, the farm bloomed again. Crops grew where ash once lay. Laughter echoed off the barn walls, and when travelers passed through and asked about the woman who saved the valley, most just pointed to the house on the hill and said, "You mean Ara? That's not just a house. That's a home built from courage." And deep down, Era knew that was true. The land she fought for didn't just belong to the Miller sisters, belonged to everyone willing to stand up for what's right. And now, at last, it also belonged to her.